community, the community in which we live in Bath, and how we can contribute to a widening understanding of our natural neighbourhood around Bath. So what I'm going to try to do, with the help of Mike Collins, who I'm very pleased to welcome also to come to join us, and he will speak second, is to just sort of try to introduce you to the ideas of how we might encourage a Natural Neighbourhood Watch, that is a community-based approach to appreciating local natural history. So that's really what we're going to try to be doing. I shall speak quite generally, and Mike is going to speak quite specifically. And I think the combination of the general and the specific may be quite helpful in leading to what I hope will be a vigorous discussion at the end of our presentation. As usual, we'll try to aim overall for about 50 to 60 minutes presentation, then give time for discussion, then there's the time for refreshment, networking, dialogue, and so forth that we always enjoy at the end of our meetings. The back of the room, I've provided the poster display board about Bath Natural History Society, which I think is an important aspect of making our activities and profile known to the wider public of Bath. Okay, so to begin, I want us to spend a little time thinking about what modern life is like these days, about modern culture, and in particular to ask this question: where and how do most people seek rewarding experience? And I'm making some suggestions here. Is it shopping? Is it making money? Is it being entertained? We're talking about modern culture. Is it eating, drinking, sex, sleeping and sunbathing? Is it competing, defeating, hunting, hurting, speeding and risk-taking? I'm obviously thinking of Jeremy Clarkson there. Is it travelling somewhere else? Is it something a little bit more creative, learning, inventing, producing, performing, worshipping? Is it something caring? Finding deep satisfaction in caring for and being cared for by self and others. So these are some thoughts. What are our priorities in modern society, in modern culture? And I ask another question. How many people truly care for their natural neighbourhood? Here's some of us, members of Bath Natural History Society, caring deeply and getting animated and excited, looking at the diverse organisms that can be found in the meadow up at Bath City Farm earlier this year. So there are some people who definitely care deeply, and we're amongst them. This is an important issue because during the summer, as I'm sure most of you recognise, a state of nature report was produced with the help of a wide variety of wildlife trusts and others, which made some remarkable and startling, or came to some remarkable and startling conclusions about biodiversity loss in this country. England is becoming a country of beauty spots rather than beauty, and must act fast to address declining biodiversity, was one of the conclusions of this report. Nearly 500 species of animals and plants have become extinct in England as a result of human activity since 1800. In the first ever audit of England's lost and declining species, 12% of land mammals, 22% of amphibians, 24% of butterflies were shown to have been lost. we're quite familiar with being treated to those kinds of statistics and sort of ideas and gloomy prognoses about the state of nature in our country. So the question must arise, what can we do about it? In fact, when the State of Nature report came out, one of our members of the society wrote to me and said, "Alan, what can we do about it?" And one of my responses was to think about organising this particular meeting as the first meeting of our indoor programme. Another thing that I did about it was I wrote a little article, which some of you have seen. It's at the back of the room there, for one of our local free papers, Local Look, which was looking at the question of why we need a natural neighbourhood watch. And of course I'm playing on the idea here that we've become used to a neighbourhood watch. What about natural neighbourhood watch? What can we do about what so many people regard as this crisis? And actually also, what can we do when we think about the priorities that most of us have in modern culture? Those questions I asked. What do most of us spend most of our time doing? How much do we really care? How much priority do we give to our natural neighbourhood and valuing it? And really my only answer to that question is educate, educate, educate. And educate with two main purposes. Firstly, to enhance awareness. Because quite honestly, if you don't know about it, how can you care about it? Now, one of the things that has struck me again and again and again is the contrast between the popularity of TV programs, books, and all the rest of it about natural history, and how difficult it is to engage people actually in their local neighbourhood, on their doorstep, in becoming interested in their natural history. And I'm sure many of you have had the experience of trying to show the simplest aspect of natural diversity and discovering actually the limited knowledge that most people have about our natural world, in spite of all this apparent interest which is evident, with all the popularity of the books, the popularity of the TV programs. The actual reality is that there's not that much knowledge available to most people, and they don't really know about how to go about appreciating their natural neighbourhood. The second thing, which is kind of related, is we need to educate to change attitude. Because those priorities that I mentioned about what most people are doing in modern culture suggest and the fact that very few will give priority. Many will express an interest, but perhaps very few will give priority to appreciating our natural neighbourhood. We want to change attitude. And we want to change that attitude and understand where that attitude has come from. Essentially, because I would insist on this, impoverishment of our habitat impoverishes us. So often the reason given for getting interested is utilitarian. We might be allowing a species that produces some wonderful drug to go extinct or whatever, and we don't know about it. But actually, I think it goes much deeper than that. Our quality of life, our experience of the world, increases with the diversity and richness of our own habitat and our own natural neighbourhood. That's my suggestion. I'm sure in many ways I must be preaching that to the converted. But who is going to take a lead in this? And I'm suggesting that actually it's not them. We can't just leave it to others. It's us that takes the lead in it. And as a university teacher, I became more and more aware over the last 20, 30 years of the decrease in attention given in schools prior to coming to university, and in universities too, to actually becoming aware of biological diversity. The students that I encountered coming in with grand A levels to the university knew very little indeed about biological diversity. And it got worse and worse and worse over the years that I was teaching. It is not given priority in our schools, it is not given priority in our universities, it is truly not given priority by most politicians, and most politicians wouldn't know a moss from a liverwort, I can tell you. Sometimes I'm not too sure myself. But I'm suggesting it's us. Not leave it to them, but us. This is our leaflet. I think our leaflet, our recruitment leaflet into our society is wonderful. It says, there's so much to enjoy. And there's so much to enjoy with some knowledge of how and where to look and what to look for. That's what people need. And we don't tell them. And nobody tells them. That even the TV programmes really in many ways don't go out of their way to show you. And in fact they can't, because they're distanced by a screen from what it means to be actually out there looking and finding for yourself. Where do we begin? My suggestion is right here, right now. Why wait? And in fact, we don't have to start from scratch. As Alan Feast showed me a little while ago, there's a wonderful report. I might want to change some of the language in it now, but there's a wonderful report which was produced by people in Bath, including some of our most notable members of the society, back in 1990, called Nature in the City. There are maps, distribution maps, descriptions in that report. Wouldn't it would be lovely for us to go back to that report and see how things have changed and updated. Wouldn't that be a wonderful project for our society somehow, or members of our society to get involved in? And in fact, this is an aspect that I've been thinking about quite a lot recently, is how project work within a society can help to bring us together, and enliven people's interest. Here's some little thoughts that I often have. Familiarity brings content. Otherwise, how can you appreciate what's new? Busying ourselves with so much else, I contend that most of us don't notice the natural variety that we pass by every day. Getting to notice, know, and care for this variety, with each other's help, helps us to get to know and care for each other too, easing the loneliness, distress, and boredom that so many of us experience in modern life, in spite of, and I would say because of, our technological sophistication. In many ways, our technology is alienating us from our neighbourhood, our natural neighbourhood, even more. It's putting more of a distance, between ourselves and our habitat. Knowing where to look, how to look, and what to look for, we can discover this variety right here, right now, in front of our noses, not just in books, on TV, and far-off places. We can also notice when it changes or disappears, and we can care enough not to let it fade. And some of you have seen this slide I prepared before, about noticing natural variety by getting closer to nature. Many of us go and walk around in the natural world looking at it from a distance, never really getting up close. And over on the left-hand side there, you can see, well, a series of pictures. Will this actually work? Yes. We've got a series of pictures that I took in our village of Bath Ford, of our local recreation field, and the view that I got as I looked at these trees at a distance, then walked closer and closer to them until I discovered the wonderful tree branches, which were covered but festooned with lichens. And when we looked really close at these, discovering the extraordinary and beautiful form of lichens that most people have no idea exists. You know, that can be found by any of us, knowing how to look, where to look, and what to look for. And I know that many of you have experienced myself and Marion, my wife, trying to help people to sort of look at or get used to using a simple lens, to help to bring nature closer to us and discovering the extraordinary beauty that resides there. Here's another view in my village of Bath Ford, a wall and a green mass. But when we look to the green mass, we start finding that actually it's not just a uniform greenness, as most people actually see. We start to notice the heterogeneity within it, the variety within it. And then if we look really close, we see this wonderful liverwort with these crescent-shaped gem cups that can be revealed through a magnifying lens. It never ceases to take my breath away. And I often find, when I introduce people to this, it takes their breath away too. People are mostly just not aware it even exists and pass by it every day. And yet you can find these sorts of things almost anywhere, any place, even in the midst of our cities. I'm sure some of you think I'm a dreamer. But as they say, I hope I'm not the only one. And I refer to a previous dreamer from a previous life, William Blake. The tree which moves some to tears of joy is in the eyes of others only a green thing which stands in the way. Some see nature as all ridicule and deformity, and some scarce see nature at all. But by the eyes of a man of imagination, nature is imagination itself. A wonderful statement, relevant, I think, very much relevant today. And here's a little bit of my own sort of view of a tree, which developed as a result of my own interest in the relationships between trees and fungi, and my own artwork as well, in painting my representation of that. Here's what I wrote, not to show off, but really just to say, in my President's Address to the British Mycological Society back in 1998. A tree is a solar-powered fountain. Its spray supplied through wood-lined conduits and sealed in by bark until their final outburst in leaves. Within and upon its branching and folding water-containing surfaces, and reaching out from there into air and soil and branching and folding water-containing surfaces of finer scale, the mycelial networks of fungi, which provide a communications interface for energy transfer from neighbour to neighbour, from living to dead, and from dead to living. Our natural neighbourhood tells us about life and what it means to live in the midst of life and die in the midst of life. So the question I ask this evening is, can we get ourselves together? If not, why not? What are the barriers? What are the obstacles to becoming more aware as local communities of our natural historical heritage? If so, how so? How can we, in practical terms, encourage a deeper involvement in the life of our natural neighbourhood? Time for me to finish and to introduce Mike Collins, who actually works in the publicity office of the National Trust, but he's here this evening to speak on his own behalf about his own locality, his own local neighbourhood, natural neighbourhood in Fairfield Park. Mike, you're very welcome to us.
Thank you very much for inviting me tonight. Thank you very much, Alan, for that open session. I suppose I have to make a little bit of a confession before I start talking. I'm in no way a naturalist. I've sort of developed an enthusiasm for nature conservation and for wildlife. In my time at the National Trust, I've worked in the National Trust press office. Is that okay? Can you hear me? Is that okay? Sorry. I've worked in the National Trust press office for the last 8 years, and I've had a chance to go to some amazing places. From the Farne Islands to Lundy to the Giant's Causeway to the White Cliffs of Dover, spend a lot of time getting to know experts and talking to experts. And I suppose my day-to-day job is very much about communicating about the benefits and the power and the wonder and sheer joy of nature. And I suppose the other thing that's really sort of reconnected with me with nature is having children. I have 2 young children, 3 and 6. And I suppose partly through their early lives and rediscovering my enthusiasm for wildlife and rediscovering and reimagining my own childhood, many hours spent digging in dirt with sticks or racing snails or collecting things, which sort of disappeared through into the dark teenage years and then out the other side. So it's hopefully that through that sort of connection through my children. And I suppose it's also I'm finding that nature is a great way to deal with the stresses and strains of everyday life, the increasing endless meetings and the rise of smartphones and emails and the fact that you're always kept contactable. And it's something that I've started to observe and started to take in the sights and the sounds of the place that I live. And as you can tell, I live in Fairfield Park, which is in the north of the city. I spend a lot of time in Fairfield Park and Lansdowne and in Charlton Valley as well. So but we're quite lucky in Bath that we have a very green city, a city with lots of green spaces. And I love nothing more than going out into Charlton with the family, down into the stream in the base of the river, in the valley there, and spending time just looking for things in the rivers and spotting butterflies, watching ants' nests or the busybody activity in that ants as the buzzards circling above and the deer roaming free as well. So it's very much a place where I sort of get that sense that the kids can roam free. It's a place where I feel that I'm sort of reconnecting with nature. And probably the best thing about it is it's only 15 minutes from where I live. And I think picking up on Alan's point, it's very much about how you can, I suppose, make nature part of everyday life. It's something that over time we've become slightly removed from, and that whole sort of sense that nature's becoming more remote. It's becoming a slightly fuzzy background to our busy lives. And a lot of people are getting their fix of nature through programs like Spring Watch and Autumn Watch, which are fantastic. But it's often about places that a lot of people can't get to, and it's about how you bring it back to the green spaces that are all around us. And also there's a lot of time spent watching streams of various sizes, and actually that sort of, people may be aware of the plight of pandas or polar bears, but maybe less so aware of what's happening in their own backyard in the UK. And it's interesting that this year the BBC has invested quite a lot of time in its Summer of Wildlife programming, where it's had things like the Burrows series, the sort of wildlife revival programme at the moment on Sunday evening. So I think they've realised that they need to do more about informing and educating and raising awareness of the plight of British nature. So I should, just a series of slides actually all within sort of 5-10 minutes of where I live in Fairfield Park. I suppose it's about sort of nature starting as soon as you open your door. So wherever you live, whether you live in a terraced house like me, or whether you live in a tower block, nature is all around us. Trees, weeds, birdsong, the changing of the seasons, the rhythm of the seasons, spring and autumn as the seasons of real change. And there's also a sort of fact that you find nature in very surprising places. It manages to adapt, it manages to find new homes, find new locations, and it's how we, again, try and open people's eyes to that discovery. It's also things like birds. I suppose it's partly also about sounds, and I suppose I've sort of, through my role and my job, I've started to pick up more on the sort of soundscapes, that sort of sound at the back of our lives. It's obviously a lot of noise around in cities and towns, and actually the power of birdsong, particularly during the dawn chorus in spring and early summer, and then into the vivid changes of colour during the autumn, the different palettes of browns, golds, reds and yellows. And actually we're so focused from often getting from A to B, so it's actually how you use your journeys to work, to school, every day weekend, every sort of weekend visits as well, to just sort of see what's around you and find out more about where you live, get into that sense of place as well. I've lived in Fairfield Park since 2002, live in a very sort of typical terrace house that was finished in the 1890s, and when my house was finished it was surrounded by fairly productive farmland, lots of allotments, and then gradually the cities extended north and east, and actually thankfully the creepers stopped out into the countryside. And as you said earlier, Bath is a very green city. We're very lucky to be surrounded by the 7 hills of Bath and the green spaces and the parks. And actually, I suppose the role of Bath Natural History Society, the role of the BRSI in actually cataloguing, sharing, informing, telling people about the fantastic nature that's in our lovely city. And obviously I'm just raised the sort of 1990 Nature and City report, which is really interesting. What I've been trying to do, I suppose, in the last sort of few months is just think about how I can sort of catalogue observations, sightings of where I live. I'm probably an amateur naturalist, if we can have such a thing. So I have an understanding of nature that's been built up through my work, from the boom in nature writing, the books of people like Robert Macfarlane and other writers that have really opened people's eyes to the power of the natural world. It's about how I can sort of catalogue nature in footpaths and verges, patchworks of greenery, woodland. So, taking pictures, just sharing information. This is a very near lane just from where I live, just across the way. And just sort of the observations that we've had a particularly good summer this year, which has been great for butterflies after several dreadful years. And I think people are sort of, once you sort of engage people with nature and they get to know it a little bit, I think they sort of fires their imagination, fires their connection with the places that they live. And talking to my friends and neighbours, there's been quite a lot of interest in what I'm trying to do, and people starting to think about the sort of nooks and crannies of where we live, the little lanes, the little spaces that maybe feel a little bit unloved, but as Alan said, once you get on your knees, you get a bit closer, you see what's lurking behind, you see what's in trees, you see things at different times of the year. So what I'm trying to sort of do a little bit is, I suppose, catalogue a little bit of the sort of natural history of Fairfield Park. It's not as grand in its ambition as Gilbert White's Natural History of Selborne Common, but it's very much, as I say, about that sort of trying to pick up on the power of nature, the sort of natural connection that we have, and maybe that we've lost over several generations, using my sort of knowledge that I've developed from work to help sort of create a network of links to the places that I'm finding where I live. I mean, Fairfield Park isn't a particularly big area, but it's an area which is lots of places that people can go and hopefully discover that they never knew existed, and find out about things that they never knew were very near to where they live. So what I'm planning on doing is very much trying to begin this process in the autumn. So this is a little bit of woodland, just off Fairfield Park Road. So this is all around Fairfield Park, Raglan Lane, where I live. So it's quite a lot of green space with lots of buzzards circling this year. You can often at night hear owls calling. So there is very much a sort of, I suppose it's just opening our ears, opening our eyes, opening our minds to the nature that's all around us, as we've moved from being a very sort of rural and agricultural society to a very urban society who spends a lot of time in cars travelling to work like me. And it's also very much about children and the role of children. And one of the bits of work that I'm involved with at the moment is looking at how we can reconnect kids with nature. So there's a report that was published by the National Trust last year called Natural Childhood, which was written by a naturalist called Stephen Moss, who works for the BBC, just cataloguing all the evidence that in one generation that connection has changed and been lost. And there's about at the latest count, 240 different organisations that are coming together to form a network called the Wild Network. And in the late autumn we'll be launching our first campaign to try and reverse that trend of children losing touch with nature. And interestingly, RSPB have been doing quite a bit of work with the University of Essex to try and establish a baseline of how connected children are with nature. And the sort of baseline data is showing that based on what they've defined as connection with nature, only 1 in 5 children have a connection with nature. So part of the aim of the World Network is to try and, I suppose, reconnect kids and to sort of, I suppose it's about that sort of thing that if you don't connect with places, if you don't understand places, how you want to save those places and look after those places for future generations to enjoy. And on the back of the campaign, there's going to be a new documentary film out called Project Wild Thing, which is all about this issue of reconnecting kids with nature. And I suppose it's through my own children that I've sort of started to look at the place that I live. And it was through a project that my daughter had to do for her school. She's at Stephen's Primary School, where they had to map the journey to school, map the route to school. And actually when I started mapping that journey, I realised actually how much nature there is on that short 10-minute walk, whether it's the blackberry bushes, whether it's the great places for sledging in the winter, whether it's the place where the mosses and lichens are, the walls and the trees, and actually just observing the different types of trees, and where the snails are on the wall and the spiders' webs in the autumn. So you actually start to build up a little bit of a picture of what nature is like. And part of the idea is to try and link up with the school. There's one teacher at the school who's very passionate about nature and runs the forest school and runs the Wild and Muddy Club for kids on a Tuesday afternoon. It's actually trying to link up with teachers and people that live in Fairfield Park and the broader city, so the people that have that knowledge and passion to come in and share that, and getting around rubbing around on your knees and trying to get all the magnifying glasses out and just trying to build that level of enthusiasm. So yeah, I think it's very much about that sort of special connection that nature brings to me in my life, and I think it's probably about sharing and building that with people that live in the area, and actually trying to sort of catalogue that, trying to get a sense of how the space and the place has changed in time, trying to uncover that sort of that hidden world, because we're always rushing about and going from A to B so quickly. Just trying to take time to reflect and trying to wander around in that sort of state of inquiry, and just no particular purpose, but just trying to wander around. And I actually did it on Saturday with the children when we were taking these pictures, where we just spent a bit of time. The wrong one, sorry. Just going around to the local area. This is my son with the ladybird, and probably by the end of it, we had a collection of ladybirds and snails and spiders and leaves and sticks, and again, it was just something we spent quite a lot of time just diving into bushes and observing things, and people were coming along, walking along and asking what we were doing, and then we were starting to talk about how this area of Fairfield Park has changed in the last 30, 40 years. So it's about, again, it's sort of that sense of neighbourhood and community, where it's just bringing people together and hopefully opening their eyes to the special nature of where we live, and how nature can help enrich our everyday lives, and making it simple, because I think sometimes, certainly in the work I do, sometimes there's a sort of feeling that you're always promoting these fantastic places where you get amazing nature experiences, one of which my favourite is the Farn Islands, which is just a sort of mind-blowing place for seabirds. But actually, a lot of people feel slightly inhibited by having to travel such huge distances. There's also that issue of knowledge. I certainly grew up in a family that spent a lot of time outdoors, but I don't claim to have any particularly deep understanding of all the different species and habitats. But once you start, particularly through children and using technology and books, and actually start identifying things, it's that spirit of information gathering and learning that is so thrilling and so important. Just a few more pictures of things all within races. So this is a nice little bit of woodland, which I think I went without when you came around earlier in the year. So, which is again, it's a classic where it's owned by Baines, and there's a bit of woodland, and in the bottom of the valley is a little bit of land which used to have horses in, and I think it's got some very rare plants in it, apparently. I was told on Sunday, which is it floods every sort of 40, 50 years, but it's just there, not really doing anything. So actually, could we through this start looking at things where we open up community-run nature spaces, trying to think about whether we could set up a community orchard in Fairfield Park as well. And I know there are quite a few dotted around in Weston and over in Bear Flat and elsewhere. But actually those sort of sense of just bringing people together at certain times of the year, those sort of, and I've said before, that sort of power of the rhythm of the season, which I think is so strong, and people will go to places to see autumn colour, whether it's Westonbirt to Stourhead or places like that, but actually you can see, looking Queen Square in October, November, it's just fantastic as the colours of the leaves gradually change through September, October, November. And I think it's about that sort of sense of social history and how natural history can extend into so many other areas, and sort of, I suppose, living in the spirit of the wonderful work that amateur naturalists do across the UK, and actually how amateur naturalists, as well as conservation organisations, including the one I work for, as well as Wildlife Trust or RSPB, can help to open people's eyes and open their minds to the joy of nature and wonder. So it's a little bit our focus. And those sort of lurking places, those sort of edgelands that you have around in places where these little tracts of slightly abandoned land, which nobody really looks after, places you often find lots of things, dumps, whatever that green red thing is over there. But it's probably a place where foxes will probably spend a lot of their time at night, or there'll be a corridor for nature to move around. And actually that's sort of different times of the day, and when I sort of look out of my house, and we're sort of lucky enough to overlook Solderby Hill, actually really look into sort of changing nature of the light in Barthampton Meadows and over this Solderby Hill throughout the day. It brings that sort of real sense of where we live and the connection to the countryside all around us. Some things hopefully that I quite enjoy. But yeah, it's very much about sort of cataloguing and people's observations and pictures, and just trying to connect people that live in Fairfield Park to those green spaces, obvious green spaces, so parks and woodland, but also the sort of wonderful little bits of verges and green spaces and weeds that are sort of lurking in corners and in pavements and the cracks and everything. So as I'm hoping it's mainly going to be something I'm looking to do through sort of people sharing content online and sharing pictures. Probably take a bit of time to get up and running. But it's something which I think hopefully over time can sort of build on some of the things that I've sort of started to learn about through my workplace, and actually just observations of everything around us and trying to sort of share some of those observations. So that's a little sort of overview of what the plans are around Fairfield Park.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And so that's our little presentation over, and I hope it sort of perhaps provided some inspiration for you in recognising what an important role members of our society actually can have within our local communities in Bath. We know stuff that others don't, and we're aware of things that others aren't. And it's just a wonderful thing to be able to share that with people and see the pleasure and the surprise and the eye-opening that can provide. But I left you with those two questions. What is can we get together? And the question is, if not, why not? What's stopping us? If we can get together, how, in terms of practice, do we do it? And those are sort of two questions that perhaps might be the basis for our discussion next. And perhaps I'd like to ask if anyone would like to start.